All right, this is section 2, test 1 for the math. And then this is question 1. So for every math word problem, write out the information as you read it. So Tilly earns P dollars for every W hours of work. So P dollars per W hours of work equals the amount of money she makes per hour. Which expression represents the amount of money in dollars Tilly earns for 39 W hours of work? So the way I would set this up is do P over W times 39W. And then these would cancel out. We'd be left with P39. And then that would be answer choice A. And so another way of looking at this, because that's a little abstract, is imagine you just had the amount of hours you worked, cool, and say you made $5 an hour per hour. Well, how much did you make? And then naturally you would just multiply them out. The hours would cancel out and you'd be left with $50 an hour. So that's just doing the same equation, just with only variables rather than numbers. All right, for question 2. For a training program, Juan rides his bike at an average of 5.7 minutes per mile. So that'll be 5.7 minutes over a mile. Which function m models the number of minutes it will take Juan to ride x miles at this rate? So what you want to do is multiply that by x miles, get the miles to cancel out. So when you do that, these cancel out and you get left with 5.7 minutes times x. And that is answer choice D. All right. For question 3, the solution to the given system of equations is xy. What is the value of y? Sweet. So they give us a pretty big hint up top. I can see that they have basically told us what x is. And so to find y, we need to isolate it. So we need to get rid of this x. So they give us 3x equals 12. And this is the hint because you can very quickly divide this by 3. And you can find that x equals 4. And now that we know x equals 4, we can plug it into this equation. So we know negative 3x plus y equals negative 6. Well, we can plug 4 there. We know it's now 4 times 3, which is 12, negative 12. So negative 12 plus y equals negative 6. Move that over, add 12 to both sides. Y equals positive 6, and that answer is B. All right, for number 4, the equation gives the speed as miles per hour of a certain car t seconds after it began to accelerate. What is the speed in miles per hour of the car 5 seconds after it began to accelerate? Sweet, so they give us the speed here. So this is the equation for speed. And this is the amount of seconds after it began to accelerate. So what is s? 5 seconds after it began to accelerate. So they're asking what s equals. And they're giving us what t equals because t equals 5 because that's the amount of time after accelerated. So all we need to do is really plug t into the equation. So we know s equals 40 plus 3t, and then t is 5. So we know s equals 40 plus 3 times 5. That would be 15. 40 plus 15 would be s equals 55. And that would be answer choice D. All right, for number 5, they're giving us a right triangle. And they're giving us A, B, and they're asking which of these represent C. So pretty quickly, I'm thinking the Pythagorean theorem, which is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And they give us A and they give us B. They say A is 4 squared plus, and then B is 5. So 5 squared equals C squared. And looking at the answer choices, I can see that they don't actually want us to square 4 and 5. They really just want us to draw out the equation and make it equal C. And so the only thing we can do to get rid of this exponent right here would be to square root this side and square root this to get rid of that. And you end up with the square root of 4 squared plus 5 squared equals C. And then that is answer choice D. All right, question 6. What is the solution to the given equation? And the equation is 4x plus 5 equals 165. So they just want us to solve for x. So we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. get 4x equals 160. And if you plug that into your calculator and divide by 4, x equals 4d, and that is the correct answer. All right, number 7, and it gives us a graph and says that x-intercept is shown as x0. What is the value of x? All right, so what is it asking? What does x equal when y equals 0? So let's look. Let's go down. Y equals 0, move across, and then that would be between 6 and 8, which would be x equals 7. So 7 is the correct answer. All right, number 8. So it gives us the function f of x equals 1 over 10 x minus 2, and it's asking what is the y-intercept of the graph when y equals fx on the xy plane. So basically, it's asking when x equals 0, what is y? So, pretty easy. They give us the function 1 over 10 x minus 2 equals y. And so we know x is 0, so x is 0, and 0 times anything, well, is 0, so 0 minus 2 equals y. And so we would find out that just y equals negative 2. And therefore, looking at our options, this is the only one where y equals negative 2, so it must be B. All right, number 9. So the function of f is defined by fx equals 7x cubed. All right, so we have the graph y equals gx is the result of shifting fx down 2 units, which equation defines function g. So we're trying to find g of x, but that just equals f of x minus 2 because it's shifted down. And so since it's shifting down, we're only affecting y because we're only going up and down. If it were saying it was shifted left or right, then that would be affecting the x variable, but it's only affecting the y. So looking at this, we can just plug it in. We know that since it's not going sideways or laterally, we know x is fine, but we just know that it's being shifted down 2. So using that logic, minus 2, so that equals g of x. Because imagine that if we drew, say, f of x looks something like this, and all we did was shift it down 2, then g of x would look like that. And so it would have the same slope, but it would just be shifted down 2 units. And so if you want to draw it out, it would appear something like that. So we know the answer is D. All right, number 10. Which ordered pair of xy is the solution to the given system of equations? All right, looking at the answer choices, I can pretty much see that the x is 3, so we don't have to worry about that because we know it's true because if we plug 3 into that, 3 plus 7 equals 10. So all we need to do to find y is plug 3 there. So we could do x plus 7 squared equals y, plug in 3 for that. And we know that 3 plus 7 would be 10 squared equals y, and 10 squared is 100 equals y. And so that's how they find answer choice A. Number 11. Which expression is equivalent to 7x cubed plus 7x minus, in parentheses, 6x cubed minus 3x? So they're just going to want us to simplify this equation. So first step is always to write it out the way they wrote it. And we're going to have to distribute this negative over to these guys. So we're going to get 7x cubed plus 7x minus 6x cubed plus 3x because it's a negative times another negative, creating a positive. And so just solve. So 7x cubed minus 6x, so x cubed, and then 7x plus 3x would be plus 10x. So you're going to get answer choice A. Okay, for number 12. Function p is defined by Pn equals 7n cubed. What is the value of n when Pn is equal to 56? So we know Pn equals 7n cubed. But when Pn equals 56, what is n? So we do 56 equals 7n cubed. First step is just to divide by 7, so we can get n isolated. We can have 8 equals n cubed. And so what we need to do is find the cube root of 8 and then n to get it isolated. And the cube root of 8 is 2. And the way I know this is because what to the power of 3 would equal 8? Well, we know 2 times 2 times 2. And that would be 4 times 2, which would equal 8. So we know it's 2, so therefore n equals 2. Okay, number 13. In the figure shown, line C intersects parallel lines S and T. What is the value of x? So we know x is here. And so if lines are parallel and a line intersects them, it means that the angle at which that line intersects them is the same for the for both lines. And so we know that off the assumption that if they're the same, that this would also be x and this would also be 110 degrees. And so the amount of degrees in a line, so if I drew a line like that, the amount of the degrees here would equal 180 degrees. And so based off what we know, we already know that 110 of these degrees have been taken up. So the equation would be 180 minus 110 would equal x, because these would be the degrees left over. And so calculating that, we would know that 70 degrees were left over, and so that would equal x. But once again, this is based off the assumption, and you guys should know this, where that if lines look like this, that means they're the same angle. Okay, number 14. So they give us a list of 10 data values shown. What is the mean of this data? Well, mean is the average of the data set, meaning it is the sum of all the units of data divided by the amount of values, number of values. And so what we need to do is add all these up, and that equals 100. So the sum of all these values equals 100, and it says there are 10 data values shown. And so the average would be 100 over 10, and that equals 10. And so that is the correct answer for 14. All right, number 15. So they're giving us the equation ET equals 5 times 1.8 to the power of t. So anytime they give you an equation where a number is to the power of a variable, they call this an exponential equation. So it's exponential. So a linear one would look like this, but an exponential one would look like this. It grows exponentially. And so we know it's not going to grow at a constant rate. It's going to grow exponentially. Okay, so they say where t is the number of years since the restaurant opened. So they're giving us some of the variables, what t represents, which of the following is the best interpretation of 5 in this context. So that's what we're trying to figure out. So let's go through the answer choices. Well, it could be the estimated number of employees when the restaurant opened. Well, that is true, because think about it. If you take this equation, so let's bring it back down to 5 times 1.8 to the power of t. When the restaurant opened, we would be at t equals 0, meaning 0 years since the restaurant opened. And so if we put anything to the power of t, so we put 1.8 to the power of 0, it's going to equal 1. And so it's going to be 5 times 1 equaling 5. So yeah, A is a very likely answer. And then we have B, the increase in the estimated number of employees each year. Well, the increase in the number of employees would actually be 1.8 to the power of t, because that is our changing variable. So no, it's not B. The number of years the restaurant has been opened, well, that would actually be represented by t, because t over here is the number of years since the restaurant opened. So nope. And then D, the percent increase in the estimated number of employees per year. That would be represented by 1.8 because every year the increase is going to get a little bigger. And so that's why we put it to the power of t, because it could be 1, 2, 3, 4. It would just, in the increase since the restaurant opened, would go up. And so that's represented by 1.8. So D is not correct. And A is the only answer. Okay, so number 16. So they give us this equation gx equals x squared plus 55. What is the minimum value of this given equation? So how low can we get gx is what they're asking. Well, what's the lowest number we can think of? Well, if we put any negatives, so any negatives at all, since it's gx equals x squared plus 55, if we put in any negatives, they're going to be squared, and so they're going to end up being positives, increasing gx. So there are no negatives that can be put in, because if we put in -1, -1 squared just equals +1 plus 55, and that would increase it. So cannot do that. So our only option is to plug in 0 for x. So if we did g of x equals 0 squared plus 55, that's probably as low as we can go, leaving us with 55. So B is the only correct answer. And if you want to graph that out, you know that any parabola or anything x squared plus whatever would be a parabola. So it would probably look something more like this, meaning that it can never dip below its vertex, and that would be 0. All right, number 17. Number 17 is another word math problem. So let's write out the information as we read it. So each year, the value of an investment increases by 0.49%. 0.49% increase. And it's based off the value of the previous year. So which of the following functions best models how the value of the investment changes over time? So we know it's increasing by 0.49%. So immediately A and B are out because they're decreasing. So we know they're wrong. And so now we know it's increasing, but we have to figure out whether it's exponential or if it's linear. And so how we find that is through this key phrase they put in where its value, it increases by 0.49% of its value the previous year, meaning it's compounding. So like compounding interest in stocks. And so if it's compounding based off the previous value, it must mean it's exponential. So C is the correct answer. But if you want to think about that a little more, imagine if you had $1,000 and it increased by 4.9%, or if you had $100 million and it increased by 4.9%. This would be a much larger increase. So these two are not the same, meaning it must be exponential. Versus a linear increase, where a linear increase would be the same throughout. So it might just every year add 5, no matter what the previous year looked like. But we know that's not the case because it's based off the previous year, so we know it's exponential. All right, number 18. So the population of Greenville increased by 7%, 2015 to 2016. So it increased 7% from 2015 to 2016. If 2016 population is K times the 2015 population, what is the value of K? So 2015 times K equals 2016, and we know it's growing. So if we know it's 7%, I would just assume K is 1.07. And the reason I assume this is because if you want 2015 to be the same size it was last year, you have to multiply it by 100%, and that's represented by 1. But it's also growing by an extra 7%, which is represented by 0.07. So adding these together, you get 107% equals 1.07. And so if you make K 1.07, then you would get answer choice C. And it's just good rule of thumb is when increasing or decreasing by a percent, whether increasing or decreasing, it's either 1 plus or minus the increase or decrease. You obviously add it if it's increasing and subtract it if it's decreasing, and that's just for all math in general. Number 19. All right, which expression is equivalent to a to the power of 11 over 12? And a is greater than 0. We can ignore that. So clearly they want us to rewrite it in this form. So the way you do that is you take a, let me fix that. You get a, the power of 11 over 12. So normally what happens is the way this would look like in this form, because it's essentially, it means the same exact thing. But the way you do that is you put the denominator on the outside, and a would be to the 11th. And let's look at our options. None of them are that. Sweet. Well, we immediately know that this is wrong because 11 would go on the inside, not the outside. But looking at these answer choices, I can see that 132 is constant. So what 11 times what would equal 132? That's what I would ask to see how we got this number to 132. And the number is 12. So 11 times 12 equals 132. So we know we're increasing these by 12. So let's rewrite it. We know it's the square root of 2, or I mean of a, and we know it's 11 times 12. So it's going to be 132 here. But what's 12 times 12? And that's 144. And that's how we know that it's answer B. All right, number 20. Number 20 is a word math problem, so I'm going to write the information as we go. So an event planner is planning a party. It costs the planner a one-time fee, $35 to rent the venue, and it's going to cost $10.25 per attendee. So that's a one-time fee of $35, and it's going to be 10.25 per attendee, and I'm just going to put X for the amount of attendees. And they have a budget of $200. So they're going to want to spend less than or equal to $200. What is the greatest number of attendees possible without exceeding budget? All right, so we can make this into an equation. We know it's going to cost us $10.25 per person, and we're going to have to pay a $35 fee in the beginning, and we're going to spend less than or equal to $200. And so solving this, we can take off 35 from each side. We're going to have it as 10.25x equals 165. You would divide this by 10.25. We would have x is less than or equal to 16. And that's how you find the answer. All right, number 21. If the absolute value of 4x minus 4 equals 112, what is the positive value of x minus 1? Well, first we have to find what x is. So we know it's going to be 4x minus 4 equals 112. And then we're going to take, and they want the positive value. So we have to do two different equations for the absolute value because that could be positive or negative. First, we're going to do the positive one. So we're going to have fx minus 4 equals 112. Add 4 to both sides. We get 116. 4x equals 116 and divide both sides by 4. We're going to have x equals 29. All right, we have our x for the positive version of 4x minus 4, and now we're going to do the negative version. So we're going to bring it over here. I'm going to put negative 4x minus 4 equals 112. I'm going to distribute this negative to negative 4x plus 4. So equals 112. And so we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. We're going to have negative 4x equals 108 divided by negative 4. And that is going to equal negative 27. And so we want the positive value of x minus 1. So if we take 29, so that'd be x minus 1, plug in 29 for x, that would equal 28. That works because that is a positive value, and we can do it for this for negative 27. So we're going to do x minus 1 and then plug in negative 27 minus 1. We're going to get negative 28. and that is negative, and they're asking for the positive value, so that is wrong. So it's going to be positive 28 is the correct answer. All right, number 22. So it's a word problem, so I'm going to write it out as I read it. So a cube has edge length of 68 inches. So let's draw it. We have a cube. It's going to have an edge length of 68. And since it's a cube, it's the same all over, so it's going to have a length, height, and width of 68. And a solid sphere with a radius of 34 inches is inside the cube. So we know it's going to have a sphere in here with a radius of 34 inches. And it's going to touch the center of each face of the cube into the nearest cubic inch. What is the volume of the space in the cube not taken up by the sphere? So what they're asking is, what is the volume of a cube minus the volume of a sphere? And they're asking for what's left over. So how do we find the volume of a cube? Well, that actually equals base times width times height. But since it's a sphere, these are all the same, so it would equal all the sides times each other, which would be cubed. Since we know that 68 is the length of it, so it's 68 cubed, and so the volume of the cube equals 314,432 cubic inches. Inches cubed. So now we need the volume of a sphere. So what is the volume of a sphere? So it's going to be 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. And all these formulas are given to you at the beginning of your test. So we can plug this in. Pi times 34/3, and that's going to equal 164,636. And so, following this equation we have here, we just need to subtract these numbers from each other. So 164,636,000. And this is what's going to be left over. And that answer is 149,796 inches cubed. So that means the correct answer is going to be A. All right, for number 23. What is the diameter of the circle on the xy plane in the equation of this equation? Well, this question is really testing your knowledge because you just need to know that this is the equation for a circle. Because if you recognize it, the equation of a circle would be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared. So looking for the diameter. All right, so if we know this is the equation for a circle, then we know 16 equals r squared. So we can find r by taking the square root of 16, that equals 4. And we know the diameter equals 2 times r. So we know r is 4, so 2 times 4 equals 8, and that's how you solve this question. Okay, question 24. For this exponential function, when f of 1, the value of f of 1 is k, and k is a constant. Which of the following equivalent forms of the function f show the value of k as the coefficient or the base? So what they're saying is when f of 1, we're trying to find k, and k is a constant or it's a base. What that means is it's either 1.6 or it's the coefficient in front of it, so 50, 80, 128, 204.8, etc. And so when we plug in f of 1, and so what f of 1 really means is when x equals 1, we want k. And so when we plug in 1, it has to be equal to 1.6 or the coefficient. And the only way we're going to find that is through practicing it or plugging it in. Okay, so let's start at the top. We know that's going to be 1.6 to the power of 1 plus 1, so it'd be 1.6 to the power of 2, but that would muddle the entire thing up, and it would not give us 50 or 1.6 because we're going to have to put it to the power, and it's just going to change the entire equation, so we know this is wrong. All right, so for b, we're going to plug in 1, so it's going to be 1.6 to the power of 1. But that still doesn't isolate the coefficient or the base because we're multiplying them by each other. So we're going to get a number that is neither of those, so we know b is wrong. So 128, 1.6, x to the power, x minus 1. Okay, so we have 128 times 1.6, where it's 1 minus 1. So that means 1.6 is to the power of 0, because it's 1 minus 1. And then actually anything to the power of 0 equals 1. So this actually equals 128 times 1, which is just 128. Yeah, this looks like it could be most likely the right answer because it isolated that constant. You did get k as that constant. And just to check, we can do it with d, where we do 204.8 times 1.6 and x minus 2. So you would actually get 204.8 times 1.6 to a negative 1 power. And once again, that's just going to get you a bunch of numbers that aren't 204 or 1.6. So C is the correct answer. All right, number 25 looks like to be pretty long word problem. So write out the information as you see it. So a model estimates at the end of each year from 2015 to 2020, the number of squirrels in a population was 150% more than the number of squirrels in the population at the end of the previous year. So from 2015 to 2020, it grew by 150% per year. So the model estimates that at the end of 2016, there were 180 squirrels. So by 2016, there were 180 squirrels in the population. Which of the following equations represents this model, where n is the estimated number of squirrels in the so n is the number of squirrels population t years after 2015. Okay, sweet. So if n represents the number of squirrels in the population t years after 2015, well, we're given all the numbers for 2016, so we know that there were 180 squirrels, so that must be n, because that's the number of squirrels at the end of the year, and we know it's been, well, 1 year since 2015, so we know t equals 1. So 1. And so if we plug this into the equation, we can just find which model will get us 180, because n is supposed to be 180 and then t is 1. So if we plug this in, we know, 72 times 1.5 is 108, so we know this model is not correct. And we plug in 1 for this, we do 72 times 2.5, which is 180, so B is a likely answer. And if we keep going, we can just tell immediately that these are wrong, because once again, this should be 180. These all equal 180, because that's the amount of squirrels after 2016. And put 1 for this. But we know these are all wrong because it's 180 times a number. Maybe if this was 0, then it would be correct, but it's not. So we just know these are wrong by looking at them. So we're left with answer B. All right, number 26. In the given pair of equations, a and b are constants. The graph of this pair of equations in the xy plane is a pair of perpendicular lines. Which of the following pairs of equations are also represented by perpendicular lines? Perfect. Sweet, so that's a big hint for where to go. So the big difference between perpendicular lines is in their slopes. And so let's say this has slope m. This would have, if it was a perpendicular line, it would have to have the negative or a different sign in inverse as well. So we know that is the relationship between these two line slopes. And it looks like through the answer choices of A, B, C, and D, we're going to use these lines to find the answer in these equations. So we're going to need to know each of their slopes. So let's start with the top one. We know that it's 5x plus 7y equals 1. So we keep working towards it. We know 7y equals negative 5x plus 1. And we know that's going to be y equals negative 5x over 7 plus 1/7. So this line's slope will be negative 5, 7. We're going to work with the second line, and that's going to be ax plus by equals 1. And that's going to be by equals negative ax plus 1. And that's going to be y equals negative a over bx plus 1 over b. So we know this line slope is negative a b. So we can actually find what a and b equal by doing this. We take the top line's slope, which is negative 5/7. We take the inverse of that, and that would be a positive 7/5. And we would set that equal to negative a over b. So now we know negative a equals 7 and b equals 5. Actually, that's a bad way to write it. A equals negative 7 and b equals negative 5. Let me change the color of my pen so we can find that later on because we're going to need to use it throughout the equation. Just imagine that was a good color blue. Sweet. So what can we do? Well, we can go and check that these have the same inverse relationship that perpendicular line should. And the way we can do that is by going in and plugging in these numbers. So what I mean is through the first example, we have to make this y equals mx plus b. And the way we do that is by what we did earlier, where we know 7y equals negative 10x plus 1. And so y is going to equal negative 10x over 7 plus 1/7. Do that to the bottom line, and we're going to know that's negative 2by equals negative ax plus 1. That's going to mean y equals ax over 2b minus 1 over 2b. And so we got to check if they're inverses. So we have the first equation, and that slope's going to be negative 10 over 7. And the inverse of that would be a positive 7 over 10. So now we have ax over 2b. We know a is negative 7, and b is positive 5. So we actually know that this is the answer we're looking for if they're perpendicular lines, but if we plug in what a is, and a is negative 7, and we know that's going to be 2 times 5, negative 10. This is what we get, and these are not the same value because that is not perfect perpendicular relationship with this slope. We know a is wrong. All right, so now we got to test out number b, or letter b, and I'm just going to move that over here because that got a little convoluted. We know it's 10x plus 7y equals 1. We got to break that down into y equals mx plus b. So the next step would be 7y equals negative 10x plus 1. And that's going to be further broken down into y equals negative 10x over 7 plus 1/7. And so now we know the slope is negative 10x plus 7. So let's do that for the other line. And that's going to be ax plus 2by equals 1. And then now we know 2by equals negative ax plus 1. And that's going to be further broken down to y equals negative ax over 2b plus 1 over 2b. So we know the slope for this one is going to be negative ax over 2b. We're going to compare it with the other line slope that is negative 10x over 7. But if we take the inverse and opposite side of that, we should get 7 over 10 positive. And so this is the slope we're looking for once we plug in a and b. So if we plug in a, we're going to get negative 7 for a and 5 for b. And if we put in negative around negative 7x over 2 times 5, we get a positive 7x over 10, meaning that this these are perpendicular lines with each other, and B is the correct answer. For this question, I would say most of the time I usually go back and double check and make sure these aren't right. But since this during the test, there really isn't a much quicker way to do this question. You really do have to write it out or have a great understanding of perpendicular lines before you attack it. But usually the SAT knows this. So normally, if you can see a super convoluted answer that's a little lengthy, like this one, they most likely the answer is either A or B because they don't want you wasting all your time on this question. So usually, if you're going to guess and you can tell it's going to be a really long question, go for the top two answers because that people who write the SAT, so College Board, does not want you, spending 5 minutes on a question you will get right. All right, the last question, number 27. So in the given equation, C is a constant. The equation has no real solutions if C is greater than n. What is the least possible value of n? So immediately looking at this, we're given nothing but this equation, and we can't break it down or simplify it because we're not given C. So I can tell it's a quadratic equation. So quadratic. So I can tell there's a few tricks we can do with quadratic equations. Let me pull it over here. X squared plus minus bx plus or minus c. So that's our quadratic equation. So we know that a equals 1 because there's a 1 here. We know b equals negative 34. And we know c, well, we don't know c. C equals c. All right. So this is a knowledge-based question. So knowledge-based question because you have to know that in order to find the real solutions and the non-real solutions, there's something that's called the discriminant function. And this is shown by b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. That's how you find two real solutions. And then you can take the same equation, b squared minus 4ac is less than 0. And that's how you find two imaginary solutions. Or no real solution. So no real solutions would also mean imaginary. And so this is the equation we'd be using to find that. And honestly, if you're really trying hard to remember this, you don't know what it is, no one ever taught you it, it's out of that x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's that b squared minus 4ac right here. And think about it. So if this number is less than 0, you can't take a square root of a negative number, so it must be imaginary. And so that's why it's this less than 0 to find the imaginary. But if it's greater than 0, then you can take the square root of it, and it would give you two real solutions. And so that's kind of the theory behind the discriminant. Behind the discriminant function. And if you need help, further understanding that or memorizing it, that's where it's being pulled from. And so let's take this over here. We're given b, and b is negative 34 squared minus 4ac is less than 0. So 34 squared would be 1,156 minus 4c, less than 0. We're going to subtract 1156 from each side. And we're given negative 4c is less than 1156 or negative 1156. And we're going to want to divide this by negative 4. If we pull that over here, then we get c is greater than what's 289. Sorry, fudging with my calculator. And we flip the sign. So whenever you divide by a negative or multiply by a negative, you have to flip the sign, but that gives you c is greater than 289, and that's what they're asking. C is greater than n, so therefore n equals 289.